Welcome to This Week in Racing. This week we're going to be talking about Max Chilton quitting ovals. We're also going to be talking about NASCAR and Dallara partnering up to form the Axis of Evil, potentially designing the Gen 7 car for NASCAR going forward. And we're also going to talk about FredWatch 2020 and its apparent cancellation, at least when we're referring to a potential of a full-time IndyCar campaign. But one of the things I'm not going to talk about, one of the things that did break just a couple of hours ago, was the fact that Brian France has entered a plea deal and has essentially gotten off the hook. The reason I'm not going to talk about it is because, to be honest with you, when you say rich guy gets DUI, then enters a plea deal to get community service, is there really anything to discuss outside of that? It's kind of the man bites dog versus dog bites man thing. And unfortunately, on that spectrum, Brian France getting essentially away with DUI falls on the dog bites man side of that spectrum. But we got lots of other things to talk about, so let's get to it. This week, Carlin Racing announced that Max Chilton will no longer participate in oval track races for the team. He will compete on the road and street circuits. This weekend at Texas Motor Speedway, Connor Daly will fill in for Max. Now, Max had a few reasons, but many of the people are kind of latching on to his mentioning of risk management, and then talking about the Red Bull designed Halo screen, which is potentially coming as early as next year to IndyCar, and just kind of giving his justification why he no longer wants to race on oval tracks. And to be honest with you, I have to say that I totally understand and support Max Chilton in making this decision. Now, unfortunately, there have been some misguided opinions out there, and that's putting it nicely. Thankfully, one of the opinions that kind of came up in the past when this has happened, when a driver has kind of said, all right, need to take a step back from oval racing. The most recent example, of course, before this was Mike Conway. Thankfully, I didn't see as many people, and maybe I just don't follow them, so it's certainly possible that a lot of this kind of came up on social media and on the forums and on Reddit and whatnot that I just didn't see. But the people, there weren't a whole lot of people kind of questioning Max Chilton's integrity or his courage or any of that. I didn't see any of that. And thankfully, it seems like we've evolved past calling Mike Conway a pussy for not wanting to go on ovals, which that was a shame that happened anyway. Because to be honest with you, and like he said in his statement, it comes down to risk management. I think it makes total sense and it actually makes sense for a couple of reasons. It's not just one-sided like some people want it to be. So yeah, there is the side of, Max Chilton wants to manage risk. And it totally makes sense to me because as we saw at Indianapolis, the Carlin Racing cars, outside of Charlie Kimball for some reason, haven't been able to find pace on the oval tracks. I think that's been pretty apparent by the fact that 3 of the cars that came out of that stable were the 3 cars that got bumped from the Indy 500. So Max Chilton just got married to his longtime girlfriend. He's starting his life. Does he feel the need to run around at the back of Texas and potentially get caught up in somebody else's wreck and get hurt? For what reason? It doesn't seem, and again, this was something that was pointed out quite rightly by Paul Tracy on one of the practice broadcasts. Max Chilton almost won the Indy 500 a couple years ago, so it's not like he's a terrible oval track driver, but I would ask the question, and I haven't seen a whole lot to suggest that this is the case, is he a good setup guy on the ovals? Is he a guy who can really find a way to get that car fast on an oval? And I would probably say no. And that probably goes to this kind of the second point. So Max Chilton doesn't want to risk running around the back when he's going to be kind of floundering, and especially without a teammate that seems, I guess, Charlie Kimball's setups must not translate for Max or something, because apparently he doesn't have a teammate right now that he can work with to kind of get him back up to speed where he was in the Ganassi days on the ovals. So it makes total sense that he doesn't want to run the back. The other thing, of course, is because he's probably not a very good setup guy, And looking at the guy they brought in, Connor Daly, who by all accounts is a very good setup guy, particularly on the ovals. I mean, look how much of the performance of the Harding racing car kind of increased when Connor Daly got into that car last year. It wasn't the massive jump it had when Pato O'Ward and Colton Herta got in, but of course, I don't think Connor Daly had the access to the Andretti shocks that those other two drivers did. So Connor Daly is kind of one of the guys, and in fact, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later when we talk about IndyCar, is one of those guys that you hear a lot talked about, setup, development driver. And I think that's very important for a new or newish, in the case of Carlin Racing, team. To have somebody you can lean on and to have somebody who can be solid and be able to get your car up to speed. Now, unfortunately, in the first couple of practice sessions, it really hasn't worked out for them so far. Connor's kind of been towards the back of the field. But considering that this is the first time this team has really been together with this driver. Of course, he did drive for them in Formula 3, but that was, almost 10 years ago at this point. So, new team, new driver. It's going to take them a little while to mesh. I would imagine once we get around to Pocono and Gateway, we'll definitely see Connor kind of help bring that team up to speed. Certainly, not certainly, but almost certainly higher than what Max was able to do at those tracks. Because if I remember correctly back to Pocono, Max wasn't really up at the front very much, and I think he was like 3 or 4 laps down towards the end of the race. Totally makes sense. And here's the thing. Let's assume, and I really do need to do a whole video on the new safety device. I just haven't gotten around to it. There's been so much else to talk about and do. But if the new safety device, because what it seemed like in the press release from Chilton was that if the safety device is on the car next year, it seems like he will be back and on the ovals. Makes sense, but I would also point out that the last safety device that they were planning on putting on the car, the aero screen without the halo bar in it, that tested and it never made it to a race weekend. And the current safety device, which is the one that's the plan, apparently it's the thing, it's on the drawing board right now. It hasn't been on a car, and it hasn't been on a racetrack, and it hasn't been out there in practice. So, is Max Chilton done with ovals? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly for the foreseeable future, because to be honest with you, we don't know what the foreseeable future is for that cockpit safety device. And again, that's something I'm going to have to talk about a little bit more in the future. Is NASCAR going spec with its Gen 7 car? Well, Adam Stern reported that NASCAR has been in talks with Dallara, potentially about the Gen 7 regulations, and more specifically, that some NASCAR executives actually believe that there could be significant cost savings by going to standardized spec parts that currently the teams manufacture themselves. Okay, I almost should get the Puma hat for this, but I won't, because it's not going to be a full-blown rant. But if you have followed me or this channel for any significant amount of time, you know how I feel about spec racing. Thumbs down, big time thumbs down. But I think this issue is a little bit larger than just, I like to see unique race cars. Because as me, the race fan, I like to see engineering excellence. I like to see teams design brand new cars, brand new ways of thinking, brand new ways to build a better mousetrap, so to speak. But like I said, this issue is a little bit larger because it involves Dallara. Now, we all know Dallara as they have been the sole supplier for IndyCar since 2008. The last non-Dallara was a Panos that was entered at the 2008 Indy 500. It hit the wall, and there hasn't been a single other chassis supplier in IndyCar since. Now, there have been a couple of other companies that have put in bids to become IndyCar chassis manufacturers, and they were denied. Dallara was chosen. Dallara built a factory, quote unquote, they don't build a whole lot of parts there, in downtown Speedway, Indiana, and the relationship with IndyCar seems to be pretty good. So, and I don't want to be misinterpreted here, but I think this is a little bit of a case of IndyCar envy from NASCAR. Now, let me be very clear when I say that. There's not so many things to envy when you're NASCAR and you're looking at IndyCar. There are a couple things, though. I think as for fans and fans who saw this, they looked at this and said, "Oh, NASCAR is going to work with the people who make the Indy cars." And then a NASCAR fan's mind immediately goes to, some of the races that everybody said, "Wow, I wish NASCAR could race like that," like, Fontana 2015 or Indy 2017. And you picture that and you say, that's what a Dallara car will produce. That's the racing that we'll get. Of course, if you think back to some of the things that NASCAR has tried, including their current rules package to try to create some of that racing, has it really worked? I would say no. I mean, it ultimately, from a fan's perspective, Dallara building either entire cars going forward for NASCAR or even building specific parts so that teams can't get advantages. I think it's going to come down to the close racing versus good racing thing, and I think it's going to fall again on the side of close racing rather than good racing. But the real issue is one that I want to bring up, and one that I think people are kind of misinformed on, and maybe I'm part of the reason to blame for this, and I hope I haven't been. But NASCAR isn't a spec series. In fact, it's so far from a spec series that if I had enough money right now, right this very instant, I could go out and develop my own chassis, hang my own bodies, and build my own engines, and show up at a cup weekend and try to qualify. Now, certainly NASCAR has been becoming, or has been in the process, in fact, really since the NASCAR boom around 2001, maybe even a little bit further ahead in time, has really kind of become a country club. Particularly when you talk about the charter system with 35 locked in full season cars, no chance of them missing a show or anything. They're in, they're there. It's essentially gatekeeping. Let's use a 2019 terminology word. That's what it is. And what this will do, what going to Dallara parts will do, is essentially create a system where anybody who wants to break into the sport isn't going to be able to anymore. You're not going to be able to build your own stuff anymore. And sure, you can say, all right, great, Stewart-Haas and Gibbs and Penske won't have, their cheater parts anymore. But here's something to consider. At least Penske, they're an IndyCar. Let's look at how many championships, how many Indy 500s, how many race wins they've been able to do in the spec era of IndyCar racing. It's, spoiler alert, it's been an awful lot. You're not ever going to be able to make teams spec. The thing is that a lot of people, when they hear spec racing, they think, IROC. And IROC was great, but you have to consider that IROC was a sanctioning body preparing all of the cars for the greatest drivers in the world, or at least the greatest drivers in the United States, and eventually it became the greatest drivers in NASCAR. But that's a whole nother topic for another day. The point is, when you put a bunch of great drivers in cars that are absolutely equally prepared, of course you're going to get great racing. That's not going to be the way it is in NASCAR, and it isn't the way it is in IndyCar currently. The best teams, the best drivers, they're still going to rise to the top. You can't make pit crew spec. Robotic technology has not gotten that far yet. And ultimately, what this is going to do, what going to Dallara is going to do, rather than going to the teams, is take negotiating power away from the teams. Currently, the teams have the option to either go to outsourced suppliers. They can, employ any supplier they want to build a NASCAR spec part, or they can take it in-house. They can build whatever part they want as long as it, fits within the NASCAR template. They can do that. What this is going to do is make it so that Dallara has an incredible monopoly, not just in NASCAR, but across American motorsports and really across world motorsports. They already have it. They already have a monopoly. Go try to find a car that's in some high level of open wheel racing that isn't named Formula One, that the car isn't built by Dallara. You'd have a very hard time finding that. I think the lowest are like the Tatis cars, which are around Formula 2 Pro 2000. So herein lies the problem. NASCAR currently has an industry where there are a ton of specialist people employed to build, manufacture, fabricate all these parts. As soon as they outsource this to Dallara, those jobs are going to go away. And racing will lose even more of the specialized, employed people that I think makes motorsports so great. I mean, when you get down to it and you kind of look at stick and ball sports versus NASCAR or IndyCar or whatever, motorsports, it's a big controversy when the ball is messed with in football. I mean, look at Deflategate, for example. But what makes this sport so great is that, the team actually kind of has to work with the equipment. They have to create their own equipment to make their equipment better than everybody else's, so when they go to the track, they can go faster than everybody else. That's a unique aspect. And the less and less uniqueness we have in the automobiles and the less and less uniqueness we have in the people working for these companies, I mean, dystopian future, it's going to get to the point where Dallara is going to decide who works in racing and who doesn't. And that's not the way it should be. And I don't have really anything against Dallara. I mean, they're good businessmen, to give them all the credit in the world, but it's not good for the sport as a whole. And as well, think about cost savings. It's probably not going to save the teams a whole lot of money. Like I said, their negotiating power is now bupkis, because now NASCAR will be negotiating the prices for them, and the parts will be sold through Dallara, and NASCAR will be getting kickbacks through that because they'll be helping Dallara to design the parts, and probably will help them distribute the parts at the track. So really, the teams probably aren't going to save very much money. There's going to be less people employed, and, well, I guess NASCAR will get some extra money out of it, and so will Dallara. So that's my thoughts on it. Could be totally wrong, but, I've seen it happen in IndyCar, and it seems like that's what NASCAR is headed for. Fred Watch 2020 canceled. That's what it seems like. Fernando Alonso will not contest the 2020 full IndyCar season, though it seems like he's very open to the possibility of running the Indianapolis 500. In the motorsport.com article that this story comes from, Fernando Alonso explained that to do 4 or 5 races as preparation does not make sense because Indy is the first oval of the championship. There are no other oval races you can do before to prepare, so a one-off is enough, I think. And we have to get to this subject, and in fact, I probably missed out talking about McLaren saying something very similar to this, that they didn't want to contest the full season for one reason or another. They're wrong. They're really wrong, and they're just setting themselves up for failure. They're essentially doing the exact same thing they did last year, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I think in Jim Aiello's podcast with Connor Daly, it came out that I think Connor said that McLaren had raised enough money to do the entire season for just the Indianapolis 500, which they didn't even run. So it doesn't seem like money's an issue for McLaren. Money's certainly not an issue for Fernando Alonso. And it amazes me because we're going to be talking a lot about Le Mans in the next week. And, of course, Fernando Alonso won Le Mans, the second jewel of the Triple Crown. Do you know what Fernando Alonso did to win Le Mans? He committed to the entire World Endurance Championship schedule. And it's not just because, and imagine if he had this attitude towards the 500 that he does, or if he had the same attitude towards Le Mans that he has toward the 500. I mean, if he said, well, I'm not going to run any races before Le Mans because there's no temporary tracks, meaning, tracks that use public road like Le Mans do in the schedule before then. Oh, well, Silverstone and Spa, they don't really translate to what I'm doing. But here's what Fernando would have missed out on had he just gone to Le Mans, done the test day, and done the race. He would have missed out on hundreds of thousands of miles of testing. He would have missed out on 12 hours of racing. And, I mean, you learn about this in go-karts. So I do not understand why McLaren and Fernando Alonso don't understand this. Track time, track time, track time, track time. That is how you gain lap time. That is how you go to the front. Track time. You can do all the simulating you want in the entire world. You can buy all the best parts. If you're not on the racetrack, you are falling behind. And it just, I don't understand, because these guys seem to get it every other place. If he showed up, if McLaren had even run the Indy GP like Elio or a few of the other one-offs do, they would have gotten pit stop practice. They would have gotten to mesh as a team. Some of these things that kind of popped up during the month of May, they probably would have been able to see and go, aha, we can identify a problem here. But because they didn't do that, because they did one test day, or they did two test days, they did the one at Texas and the one in Indianapolis, and I understand, because I did see Zach Brown doing some damage control articles in Racer, yes, it's very understandable that there's limited test time for IndyCar. They specifically mandate that you can't have a whole lot of testing. So why not run Pocono? There's a 2.5-mile oval, a 500-mile race later in the season. And yet we've got Fernando over there saying, well, there's not another oval track that we can go and prepare at. Are you kidding me? I'm sorry. A short, flat, 2.5-mile oval, a 500-mile race distance, a 500-mile length. I mean, it's like, okay, go to Pocono. Okay, if Fernando doesn't want to run Pocono, I understand. It's a high, let's go back to Max Chilton. Risk management. Maybe if you're a two-time world champion worth hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't want to go run Pocono. Fair enough. Hire J.R. Hildebrand and go to Pocono and figure your crap out. I don't get it. I do not understand. And it's not like it's a money thing. It's not like we're hearing with Harding, Steinbrenner, or Carlin that they may be struggling for money towards the end of the season. This is McLaren. They earned a ton of money. I mean, if anything, for your sponsors, give them at least one race of exposure. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. And, who knows what's going to happen before next year. I mean, we could see Fernando going to a completely different team and McLaren striking out on their own. I mean, that's a potential that we could see McLaren and Fernando, in two separate teams next year, both trying to win the Indianapolis 500. I don't know. The whole thing right now is a dumpster fire, and it doesn't seem like it's getting any better. And I can tell you this, I mean, this is negative, but Fernando is not going to win the Indy 500 as a one-off. The situation he had in 2017 was about as perfect as it could have possibly been. And I don't see another opportunity, unless he gets a Penske ride, that he's ever going to be in that position again if he doesn't run the full season, or at least a partial season. Run the rest of the oval races. I know you've already missed Texas, but at least run Gateway or Pocono or Iowa or something. Run Laguna Seca. I mean, run a race. Get your crew out there. Get your car out there. Bond as a team. I do not understand this. It doesn't make any sense to me that they just seem to not want to do anything until Indianapolis. Maybe someone else can explain it to me. So that has been This Week in Racing. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments what you think of anything that I discussed today. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we will see you in the next video.